state. So one website that I always refer to, I know there's other sites around, but one I've just traditionally always referred to when I need to know where a fire's burning or how it's been tracking is NAFI, Northern Australian Fire Information. I think they've got that right, Rohan. So yeah, Rohan has come down from the Charles Darwin University to tell us and talk to us about NAFI around this side. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you here today. So NAFI next year will be in its 20th year of providing vital information for land managers across Northern Australia. So it provides a really critical resource. I guess it was one of the first group of scientists who came together and realised good fire management is really about land management and how we can support land managers. So NAFI, hopefully many of you have seen it before. It looks like this, and you can go in there and get a variety of near real-time information about fire management. It's now called, it was called NAFI North Australia Fire Management, but we now cover 70% of Australia. So we go right throughout the rangelands, throughout most of South Australia. We just missed out a couple of those sort of relevant states down the bottom of what they call New South Wales and Victoria. Yeah. But those of us who are really keen on best practice fire management as land management are all included in NAFI. So the key information that you get on NAFI is the near real-time hotspots, which show you where active fires are. And that's critically important for intervention and for your fire management planning. And we also provide on a near weekly basis updated maps of burnt areas. I don't like to call them fire scars anymore because it implies that all fire is bad and that's a scar on the landscape. So I just refer to them as burnt areas. So this is the latest snapshot, and you can see quite a few fires north of Kununurra at the moment, but all of that sophisticated early dry season burning through the landscape there. Just one thing to remember about the hotspots, there's a whole constellation of satellites. They're going around and picking them up, but it can take a few hours for them to appear on NAFI and maybe 1 to 2 hours more for them to actually appear. So if you see a fire across the road and there's no hotspots immediately, just wait, they will probably appear. But if it's cloudy, they won't. Even after all this time, we still don't have good satellites that can see through clouds. So one of the first things we show on the NAFI front page there is a quick snapshot of where is cloud over Australia, so you can get a sense of whether or not you're going to be getting that near real-time information. I might mention whilst we're on this page, up at the top menu there's a button there, Report, and if you click on that button you can get really very sophisticated reports pretty much anywhere across Northern Australia in specific tenures. Specific project areas about fire histories from those landscapes. The other thing is so the burnt area mapping, and that we do that almost weekly using a satellite called MODIS. It's a very regular satellite, so we're able to provide that information quite quickly. One thing about the MODIS mapping is that it's not very fine scale, so the smallest fire we can pick up is 250 metres. But more commonly, people are starting to use some other satellites. There's one called Sentinel, and there's the old satellite Landsat, which can give you much more refined information, which is really very helpful for picking up a lot of that early dry season landscape burning. Once again, one of the really key things about NAFI is that we have now coming up to 20 years worth of data about fire management in this area, and that is probably the world's best repository of evidence-based information. And I know there's been lots of discussion around fire frequency and the fires across Northern Australia and the Kimberley. From my perspective, what I see in Northern Australia is some of the world's best fire management practice. We can show, by comparing fire frequency from these data, that over 340,000 square kilometres across Northern Australia has less fire now than it used to. over 50% of the Kimberley has less fire now than it used to. Now, I work with a lot of land managers across Northern Australia, and none of them are happy about where we are at the moment. Everybody's working really hard to try and improve fire management going forwards. But I think you do need to celebrate the incredible achievements, because fire management under climate change conditions is difficult. So the achievements are quite incredible. So talking about that high resolution fire mapping, so I've been involved in a project with a lot of the North Kimberley fire managers over the last 2 years, where we've produced very high resolution using that Sentinel and Landsat scale mapping going back 20 years, which is probably the best fire history data set that exists in the world at the moment on this large scale. We're starting to put bits and pieces of that up on NAFI as well. So you see here, if you go to the fire history and the high-res fire scars, you can sort of zoom in on this very detailed fire mapping, the North Kimberley. So as I said, that's funded by the Indigenous fire management groups in the North Kimberley, and they're also funding really high resolution, the best resolution vegetation mapping, so they can do some really high-level analysis of what's going on. So I just think it's also important to acknowledge that these Indigenous land managers are really putting in the hard yards in terms of investing in that research and outcomes in order to be able to improve their management outcomes. It's they're trying to improve their practice to make it as sophisticated as possible. So just some practical tools using NAFI for planning. There's a whole bunch of things you can do to set up automated hotspot notifications if you've got fires near you. Also looking at the fire frequency, as I said, along fire frequency. Using tools to track fires, to animate fire spread for your intervention. And also, of course, using NAFI, these sort of data sources, to evaluate your work at the end of the year. And how to do all of these things. I've only got 10-15 minutes today, so I can't give you a full NAFI tutorial, but if you go to the information hub, there's a NAFI help page, but there's also a bunch of information with some of those fire history and frequency comparisons, but also been producing a whole bunch of hotspot animations, which are really useful for understanding fire spread in these landscapes. Some other tools, so we've invested quite a bit of time over the last couple of years developing a NAFI on your mobile, because everyone's sort of a bit phone obsessed these days. So if you have either on your Android or Apple store, you just type in NAFI, you can get the mobile app, and once again it will show you the sort of near real-time hotspots, but also the updated burnt areas. So quite a useful field tool. For those people who are into their GIS, and I know a lot of NGOs and ranger groups are moving towards using QGIS, the premier open source GIS software. We've also produced a NAFI plugin there, so you can incorporate your own data sets straight on your desktop with the NAFI fire data sets. Better not forget, I've also got Kerry Crosby sitting down there. If you can put your hand up, Kerry. So Kerry is our Western Australia fire mapper, so almost every week, depending on cloud and data availability, she'll map pretty much the whole of Western Australia, except for that little bit around Perth. But so she's watching the fires very closely across the Kimberley. If you see any sort of particular issues with her mapping, you can always send NAFI or Kerry an email and she can have a look. And if she can verify that there is an issue with the mapping based on the satellite imagery, then we will edit it. So it's not an automated process. There's a bunch of people. I do the NT mapping. We've got a guy in Queensland who does the Queensland mapping, and you can always talk to us about what you're seeing up on NAFI. So just mentioning, we're sort of moving into a new era NAFI, and we're going to do a sort of whole design update quite soon, so hopefully that'll roll out next year. We'll keep the old NAFI for the people who like the way it was, but hopefully this format will be a bit easier to use. And finally, we put out a sort of bit of a NAFI newsletter every now and then that sort of updates what's going on. So you can just email nafiadmin@cdu.edu.au, and Kerry will put you on the list. I might just mention as well, every year for about the last 5 years, we've been involved along with the Indigenous Carbon Industry Network with a large Savannah Fire Management Forum that brings together groups across Northern Australia to Darwin. The last 2 years have been COVID affected, but next year will be the first in-person Savannah Fire Forum. It's a really good opportunity to see what people in the Cape are doing, people in Arnhem Land, the top end, what they're doing, but of course to tell you a story from the Kimberley, because a lot of the issues you're talking about are common across Northern Australia. So yeah, I encourage you to have a look at the Savannah Fire Forum in 2023. I think if you just sort of Google that, it'll come up. And that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohan. Question.
Rohan,
Yep.
we really are fortunate to have NAFI. Oh God, that's loud. We really are fortunate to have NAFI, that I think came out of the old tropical savannas, CRC, many years back. You said that 50% of the Kimberley now has less fire than it used to. What does that say for the other 50%?
I don't have the graphic on me right now, but I think it was about 30% there'd been no change, and it was around 17% that there was more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good to know. Yeah, thanks.
And I'm sure most managers are still looking for much less fire again, but it's not all doom and gloom. But it's never good enough.
Great, thank you. Anyone else for any other questions? Yes. Go, Kath.
Sorry, not a question, but if people want help on how to use NAFI, you could also ask me or another climate mate from the Northern Australia Climate Program if you want to learn how to use it.
We have tried to make NAFI easy to use, but over the last 20 years there's been a lot of additions, a lot of people asking for different sort of widgets, so there's a lot you can dive into. Kerry's also in the process of developing some more sort of training content for NAFI as well, which we hope to sort of roll out and be sort of an open source way to access information.
If I fly along and I see a fire that's just has the potential to spread and it's obviously not big enough to be registered by NAFI, is there some way that I can let NAFI get the word out there? Because very often for us, response time is critical.
Yeah, I think that might be a bit tricky at the moment in the way NAFI's set up to have active fire notifications. That might be more something which would go through, is it PFAS here? More of their systems, I think.
Yeah, so I'm just asking, like, if I could just send a photograph and a GPS coordinate, are we going to go that way?
I think on that sort of direct response format, I think it would be more in the state emergency services. I think that would be more of an appropriate form.
That was going to be a question I had, was you're not the only system that does this. There are other systems. So what are the differences, in terms of why, because I know that a while back there was a time there where NAFI may have ceased to exist, but it's still kicking along. So it's obviously delivering a service that's of good quality. But there are other systems, and I hear of resolutions down to 10 metres and all that sort of thing, and people that when they pick up fires instantly, etc. So just curious on the differences between the systems.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is that NAFI is really very focused on the land management application as opposed to an emergency response application. In terms of the resolution of the fire mapping, what we try to provide, and with the hotspots, is something which is of high quality and verified. So a lot of the automated high resolution mapping and even the hotspot provisions provided through these other services haven't been manually verified. So there can be issues with the quality of the data you're getting at times. But we are trying to provide more verified high resolution mapping. And I guess the other key thing, the NAFI, is the extent of the constancy of data that we have. So the going back the 20 years, but also that we cover pretty much all of Australia, so as a national platform, because there are lots of state agency platforms which are sort of more focused on that emergency response space.
Excellent. Anyone else got any questions? Thanks, Rohan. Good, mate. Cheers.